And that moves us on to our action agenda. Before we get to number 12, I do want to say that the board did not complete executive session within the hour, so we are going to re-adjourn for executive session at the conclusion of this meeting to continue addressing item C. So I did want to address that before we got to 12, which is action as necessary or appropriate on matters discussed in executive session. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
I'd like to make a motion the board approve selected employment items shown in Exhibit A.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes? Ms. Snipes, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 7-0, and that moves us to item 13, approval of the proposed 2024-2025 board meeting schedule as seen in Exhibit E. Do I have a motion? Anyone?
I'll move that we approve the proposed 24-25 board meeting schedule per Exhibit E.
Do I have a second? Ms. Barnhart. All right, and for discussion, Dr. Ross.
Yes, Ms. Mandatelli, want to come forth with any questions? The only thing I've noted is that we're not meeting on the national championship night. So.
Yes, Madam Chair. Just in quick summary of this,
we are continuing to hold, we're recommending to hold all meetings here at the Center for Advanced Technical Studies again for the next school year, with the exception of the meetings that occur in the summer months. Those would be at the district office in order to relieve the pressure on staff here at the center during the summer, as well as that's when a lot of the maintenance activities take place here. All regular meetings are scheduled to begin at 7. Like Dr. Ross mentioned, we will not have the inconvenience of a national championship on a board meeting evening. The board will also continue to have 2 meetings per month, except for July, November, December, and April. So I'm happy to take any questions that you have about this, and once it's approved, we'll have it published appropriately.
okay, any questions? All right, seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? And that motion carries 6-0, and Ms. Snipes stepped out, so she abstained. Thank you, Ms. Taylor. All right, that moves us to item 14, appointment of Richland County First Steps Board Member for School District 5 of Lexington and Richland Counties in Exhibit F. Do I have a motion? Anyone? Ms.
DeVita Price.
Like to make the motion.
Mr. Hogan.
Huh?
Go ahead, Mr. Hogan.
Make sure I got it right. I'd like to make the motion that the board approve the administration's recommendation that the Board of Trustees approve the recommended appointment of Richland County's First Steps board members for School District 5 of Lexington and Richland County.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I heard Ms. Huddle. All right. Dr. Ross. I just wanted to get the motion out there first, guys.
Yeah. Well, as our Chief of Student Services and Planning, Office of Student Services and Planning, Dr. Harris, to come forward with the administration's recommendation for approval.
Thanks so much, Dr. Ross. Members of the board, general community, we are here. We ventured here just a little while ago, it seems like, to talk about our initial request for a board-appointed person to serve on the Lexington County side of District 5. Tonight we're here making a very similar request regarding First Steps in terms of the Richland County side of the house. This comes by way of a June 19, 2023 reauthorization act called Act number 81, which was signed into law by the governor's office, which in short simply says, among several things, that the local board where a Richland County First Steps is actually operating, that the local board would at least appoint 1 member to that particular board. And again, we've done that from the Lexington County being a 2-county district. We wanted to bring this forward for Richland County on tonight. Recommending in terms of Richland County, Mr. DeVita Price, who's our Coordinator of Youth and Family Services, who has served on Richland County, continues to serve on Richland County Board of First Steps in various capacities. As recent, she is the outgoing chair of that particular board. So Mr. DeVita Price is the recommendation, the administration recommendation on tonight.
All right, any questions for Dr. Harris? All right, seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor? That motion carries 6-0 with Mr. Scully stepped out. He abstained.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. All right, then, next item is item 15, first reading, approval of proposed revisions to Board Policy DBJ Budget Transfers Exhibit G. Do I have a motion? Mr. Hogan.
Make the motion that the Board of Trustees approve the first reading of proposed revisions to Board Policy DBG, Budget Transfers.
DBJ.
DBJ.
Do I have a second? Ms. Snipes. All right, Dr. Ross and Ms. Wilkerson.
Ms. Wilkinson?
Thank you. Good evening once again. So this is, as y'all mentioned, but Board Policy DBJ in regarding budget transfer. So we did bring this before you at the last meeting for discussion. Based on some of that conversation, we do have some proposed changes and some proposed language in the policy. The change here that we are recommending at this time, the original, let me start with the original. The original policy said that authorize the superintendent or his or her designee to approve general fund line item transfers in the aggregate totaling no more than $10,000. General fund budget transfers over $10,000 will be presented to the board for approval. So again, based on last meeting's discussion, this has been revised to read, the board authorizes the superintendent or his or her designee to transfer budget amounts between major categories in the general operating fund up to $250,000 as long as total spending does not exceed the approved budget. General fund budget transfers between major categories greater than $250,000 will be presented to the board for approval. Additions to the approved general fund budget must be approved by the board. So again, this is something that we mirrored based on other districts around us, based on districts that are like size in South Carolina. We also received a legal opinion on this to make sure that it was certainly legal to make these adjustments. Mr. Alan Smith from, I'm going to mess it up, Halligan, Mahoney, and Williams, I believe, reviewed this for us and provided the information. I did want to also bring the financial accounting handbook. I'm sure y'all don't have that handy, but this is something that sits in my desk drawer and I refer to quite often. So within this accounting handbook, it really dictates everything accounting-wise. So as far as account numbers, structure, fund account, function, all of that. So when we talk about major categories, when we're looking from an expenditure side, it lists them as functions. I know you can't read this, but it lists it as functions. And the major categories from here are instruction. So that's any function that starts with the number 1. So that's the first major category. You have instruction. The second major category would start with a 2. It's support services. So that encompasses everything from principals to guidance to even some of our district office team members. Then it goes over to 3, which is community services, which would encompass anything from community relations, civic services, public library, custody, that's like after school care, things like that. There's 400, which starts with a 4, other intergovernmental expenditures, et cetera, transfers, and then 5 is debt service. So those are the 5 major categories as defined in our financial accounting handbook. And so when I refer to major categories in that $250,000 transfer, that's what I would be referring to.
I have a question. When you're saying that, when you're saying between major categories, would that mean that you could transfer $250,000 from instruction to debt service?
You could not. It
You
would
could not.
prohibit you from doing that. You could transfer $250,000 from kindergarten to 3rd grade.
Within instructional
Within instruction,
services.
right.
So it has to stay,
has to stay
within the major category.
Yes.
Not so between kind of sounds, I don't know, is it just me? I might be getting into the weeds on that one. I just wanted to make sure that that's what that means. It's in the same.
It has to be within the same major category. So, like I said, so the best example would be like moving from kindergarten to 3rd grade. We would not move from a kindergarten instruction to principal or administrative or something like that. We would not make that move if it was greater than $250,000. That would come back to the board for approval.
Okay.
And just truly, in general, we don't do that. Just in general, instruction stays with instruction, support stays with support.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I clarified that.
yes.
Ms. Huddle?
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion. I move to amend the motion to change the wording of policy DBJ budget transfers to read all budget transfers other than net zero budget transfers for substitute teacher expenses will require board approval in advance and will be notated in the monthly and annual reports.
Do I have a second? Ms. Barnhart?
Can I explain my motion? The reason I make that motion is, as we discussed earlier, the biggest issue is the transfers for the substitute teachers. So I think if we address that in the policy, then we don't have to have dollar amounts. I checked, I know you said we checked with an attorney, but I sent an opinion from the AG that was a county opinion, but the laws and the structures are the same, where the AG felt like they issued an opinion that counties could not transfer budget, but even between line items without a budget, without a board vote. The other reason I think that we should vote on these is that we go through 3 meetings and enormous input from the public and from each other on the budget, and we do discuss items much less than $250,000. So to be able to move less than $250,000 without budget approval, even if it's within the line items, it could be from one school to another, it could be from one instructional program to another. That's a lot of money. Also, budgets aren't normally adjusted. We talked about that earlier. We meet, we discuss the monthly report every single month, so the finance office could send us in advance, just as part of the budget package, hey, these are the items we want to move, here's why, quick vote, public's aware. It's complete transparency. We just got through a very long discussion about a potential bond referendum. We need more transparency, not less. So I think that this would be a happy medium. This amendment, as I've written it, would allow it to make all those ones for the substitute teachers, but anything else would come from the board. One last point I would like to make, and I have something I'd like to put in the minutes on this. I did look at we got some information from some school districts, but I looked for others. And just a few, Pickens County, they have no provision at all for budget transfers in their policy. Charleston County, no provision at all for budget transfers. Greenville County, in their financial report, it actually says to ensure compliance, budgetary controls are established by function and activity within each individual fund. Budget dollars cannot be transferred between funds without budget approval. So anyway, I just think this is the right thing to do to be able to do this stuff with the temporary help, but have the transparency where any other adjustments are brought to the board and approved at the monthly meetings.
Dr. Ross?
Oh, there were questions.
Oh, I thought you had, okay.
Real quick,
Yes, and I have some questions too.
Yeah, can you read the amendment again, just so I can write it down?
I move to amend the motion to change the wording of policy DBJ, budget transfers, to read, all budget transfers other than net zero budget transfers for substitute teacher expenses will require board approval in advance and will be notated in the monthly and annual reports.
All other?
All other.
So that eliminates the 10,000.
It does, and the reason why I did that is I went back and looked, and the 10,000 is extremely arbitrary. It's never been changed. And let's go back to, Mr. Satterfield talks about his principal jobs. I almost never do this, but I'm going to do this, okay? I ran the budget for Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina for years. I ran the budget for Colonial Life and Accident for years, budgets that are far greater than ours. You don't change your budget. That's the whole point, is if you start moving it all around, then at the end of the year, you can't go back and say, well, how did we do compared to how we thought we would do? Most organizations don't change their budget without a board, something massive. Like at Blue Cross Blue Shield, it had to be you won a major contract, something like that. So really, we shouldn't be moving it around, and this allows us to move it around for the substitute teachers, which I understand is an issue and why.
I saw Mr. Scully first, and then I'll go to, okay, you're done? Okay, Mr. Satterfield. No. I'm trying to go in order. It's hard when I'm looking all over the place.
I was looking over what some of the other districts, District 1 and Fort Mill as well. Can you tell me the reason for requesting the change? Is it simply because of substitute teacher issue? I mean, can you give us an example of why this would be a good change, and would it delay the educational process, the function of our district? Can you give us an example of that, or
Yes, sir.
share with us?
Yes, so again, certainly would not recommend increasing the budget or changing the total budget in any way. This would just be moving between different functions, different line items like that. So, a couple examples that come up. One example is a human error. We should have budgeted $12,000 for a principal supply account. Again, as a former principal, I'm sure you would not be happy when we budgeted $1,200. So when that came to my attention, hey, what happened here? I've historically gotten $12,000. Why did I only get $1,200? We look back, it was a keying error. So I need the ability to be able to give that teacher, that in this case it was a principal, that $11,000. So that's one example. Another example that happens quite often is changes to this accounting handbook. And so one example that we hear a lot from technology is with their different account codes. So we have the budget in a 345, which again, this is very granular, but we have the budget in a 345 account, but according to this financial accounting handbook, it tells me it really should be charged to a 445. So when they go in to put that purchase order in, it's flagged and says, you can't do this because you don't have the budget for it. So they have to then either override or get permission from the finance department to make that adjustment. So those are, a lot of times it's stuff like that where they're making changes. Some other items that we have talked about before are, salaries, benefits, where we do not, are unable to hire a position. We then look at contract services. A lot of times in, Alan and Dave's department, they have money in their supplies account and they realize it's an emergency. I've got to get somebody in here to take care of this right away. So then it's now a service that instead of buying the plumbing supplies to fix the issue, you now have to actually hire a service to come in and fix the plumbing issue. So it's a different account. So a lot of times it's just account changes. It's not necessarily anything wrong. It's just to get it accurate, as accurate as possible for the financial accounting handbook, we have to make those adjustments.
Right. I think one of the things that sort of stuck out to me was our policy went from 10,000 to 250,000. That's not 10,000 to 15,000. That's 10,000 to $250,000, $250,000. And that was the reason I asked, can you give me some examples? So you're saying that as of yet, we haven't seen anything so large as a $250,000 error or miscalculation or anything like that?
I wouldn't necessarily, I would not call it
I don't
an
mean,
error.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but.
No, I mean, I do think.
Or coding or something, change in coding.
Just changing coding, but again, some of our softwares can cost $200,000, $300,000. So, it's not necessarily that it's a $10,000 piece of software that might need to go to a different account. And then again, with salaries, we're talking, it could be a, just $80,000 salary position plus the benefits to it. We're talking $120,000 position that needs to be now moved to a purchase services. So that's where, and then the 250 really came from looking at what has been kind of requested so far. And then, again, based on our total budget of $232 million, that was, a really small percentage compared to that 232 versus the 10,000.
Let me ask you one last question, and that is, the coding, are they not correlated? I mean, does the state make changes along the way without giving advance notice, or how does that work? You would think that there would be some kind of software that would,
I will
work
say,
with schools.
Just for information, a lot of these financial accounting handbooks, so this one's dated in 1920, but the one that just came out, this is an old one, but the one that just came out is dated, it came out this year, like about a month ago, and it's the FY22 financial accounting handbook. So that's how delayed they can be on getting these out. But again, not to say that there's a ton of changes from year to year, but again, when we're looking at a $232 million budget with 22 different schools and everything that we're looking at, it absolutely does happen that previously it was charged to account 3. Now we know based on the new funding manual, it needs to be a 4. Or again, like what happens in Dave's group, we thought we could do this in-house. We thought we could, just purchase the supplies and fix the issue, but now we need to contract it out.
Okay.
And so it's just
And
things like
I
that.
said on one last question, but I did have one more. I apologize for that. I noticed that the wording in the new policy or the presented policy was that, it will appear in the monthly financial report. The other districts are talking about it will be reported to the board. Sounds to me like it's a little more formally, by the way, I don't know, with an asterisk, or that would be part of the, part of your reporting to the board, say, by the by, we did, because of board policy, we did have to move these funds, and I need to report that to you. Does that make sense?
Yes, I can certainly revise the word appear. I do know just from like listening into Lexington Ones, theirs is like an information item. So how we do like with our superintendent's report and we do our monthly financial report, that's where it would be. So we can certainly have it in the adjusted column that we talked about earlier, but if y'all want further detail, we could always potentially add that in to that just kind of as an information.
I apologize. I was just thinking if that sends up red flags for anybody, they might find comfort in knowing that
Okay.
this is important enough that we're going to report that to the board, not just have it as a line item that
Okay.
it may be noted or duly noted or not. Just a suggestion.
I do, go ahead.
I just didn't know if now is the time to address some of Ms. Huddle's questions, or do we need
Well,
to continue?
yes, but I also have a kind of a caveat that might help address some of those questions, or I don't know. It might be another question to address that's related to both things that Ms. Huddle and Mr. Satterfield have said. I mean, one of the things that I was going to say is the $10,000 number is significantly less than the $250,000 number. So one of the things that I wanted to ask, and I may be blanking, but you've made comments about like how like things have happened, like the $12,000 supply issue was a keying error for a principal, or like other little things have happened, and where this has risen to the level where it needs to be changed by the board. I don't really remember ever having it brought to us where there have been things that needed, like where you needed approval because the $10,000 threshold was a problem. So my question is, like, how often does this happen? And if it happens that often, are you just not bringing it to us so the principal does, gets, or whatever party gets $1,200 instead of $12,000, and they're out of luck and we just don't know about it?
So a couple of things. I have, again, I've been on staff about 1.5 years, so I had asked my team, like, what was done in the past, because I'm trying to understand, based on this policy, the way that I read it and I interpret it, it says any transfers more than $10,000 need to come to y'all. So I'm like, how have y'all been functioning? And so in some of that discussion, my understanding is that maybe in the past they have allowed movement if it was the same function greater than $10,000. So by function, it could be they allowed movement from kindergarten to kindergarten, and they allowed movement from 3rd grade to 3rd grade, or from principal to principal, and that may not have been presented to y'all. But that's not necessarily the way that I understand this, because it does say transfers more than $10,000. So that could be why it was not always presented to y'all. Another thing that, you know, has certainly happened this year is that these transfers just aren't happening, and so that we actually have to override it on our end. So we're allowing overrides, which to me is an internal control concern, to allow purchase orders that I know, okay, well, you should have 12,000, you've got 1,200, so we're allowing that override to get to 12,000 just to avoid, you know, always having to come back to the board. So that's my concern with keeping it the same way, is inundating y'all with constantly coming back to say this, you know, and again, errors happen. It's a $232 million budget. I'm not afraid to admit my error. This is certainly my error, but I don't know that y'all want to know about that, or that's something I need to publicly present to y'all when something like that may happen.
Right.
But,
I know you were going to
that's-
address some of Ms. Huddle's questions.
Yes, if I could just have a moment, I tried to write down some of the items. The first one was regarding that county AG opinion. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I did talk with the same attorney, Alan Smith, actually at budget time, and we talked about counties versus school districts and even cities, because at the time, I remember we were discussing, you know, the number of readings, and I could not find anything in the state statute that governed school districts and the number of readings. I could only find information about counties in the state statute. So in my discussion with Alan, he said, you're right, the state statutes talk about counties. Board policy governs school district budgets. The only, again, this is based on my discussion with him, that the only guidance as far as state statute with budgeting that's in there for school districts is the piece about public hearings, and that you have to post, you know, 15 days before a public hearing, you have to post that in a local newspaper. But as far as number of readings, as far as that AG opinion that was mentioned about transfers, I don't believe, based on my conversation with him, that would apply to school districts. Again, based on my conversation with him, board policy governs how school districts, you know, do their budget process. So he did, you know, again, in that discussion, and that discussion, we were talking about number of readings specifically, but in that discussion, he said, you know, it's certainly customary that most districts do 2 readings like y'all do, and that is part of our board policy, which governs it. So I do feel like the board transfer, or the budget transfer policy, would fall into that same guidance there. And then you also mentioned that Charleston doesn't have a provision about budget transfers. You're right, I did look it up. They don't have policy DBJ. They don't mention board budget transfers at all. So if there's not guidance on it, I don't know that we can safely say they don't allow them, because they don't mention them. So we don't necessarily know how that is done. But I have certainly done research on other districts and their policies, and they're, you know, it's kind of a little bit of a mixed bag. There's definitely ones that you can find that are more restrictive. There's ones that you can find that are more lenient. But I did try to do my research focused on the ones that are geographically close to us, and likewise, that's why I also included Fort Mill.
Right. I saw Ms. Barnhart. She hasn't spoken, and then I'll go to Ms. Huddle.
This might have already been asked and answered, but what were the determining factors in going from such a small number to such a large number, from 10,000 to 250? I mean, it just seems, kind of Mr. Satterfield's point, a very big jump. So could you kind of explain how we came up with the 250,000?
Sure. I mean, if y'all remember at the first discussion, I didn't have a number in there. You know, my original discussion was really looking mainly at the Fort Mill Lexington 1 policy, where there is not a threshold. When I went to board officers, I talked to the board officers, and we kind of discussed some items, and the suggestion was made, maybe you should put in a number just for a comfort level. So we kind of like went back about, okay, what does that look like? You know, how, you know, and so we went back to what has been requested, and, you know, how many could we essentially do administratively at a certain threshold. And so that's how we kind of came up with the $250,000 number, that would really get us from an administrative level, that that we would not have to come back to the board unless it is a very major item. And so again, with a $232 million budget, that's about 1%, or I'm sorry, 0.1 of 1% of the budget. So, you know, again, when you think about the volume of our general fund and the $232 million, it's still a very small number. So I think the 10,000 is really, it was totally arbitrary. Like, that's kind of, I don't know where that came from at all. I think that was in, you know, the last time it was what, '07, '09, when it was revised. And I don't know what was changed there, so I don't know where the 10,000 came from. But that's where my team and my logic came from with the 250.
And the clarification to that, based off of the board officers meeting, when we were at our meeting last time and we were in discussion, Ms. Huddle raised the issue about, well, I mean, what if we moved $1.5 million for portables? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no guidance there when there's no dollar amount. So we were like, well, I mean, bring to the board what you think is reasonable. And I guess that's where that number came from. Ms. Huddle, did you have another?
Yeah, I just had some follow-up questions. So, in the example that you gave where a person was budgeted, so we had salary and fringes, and we hired a consultant instead, why would we change the budget? Don't we want a record that this was budgeted salaries? What's wrong with having the budget one place and the actual another?
Well, again, when we look at our budget to actual reports at the end of the year, which is a part of our audit, it looks like we underspent in salaries and we overspent in consultants.
And we
I mean,
did.
And that's, I mean, I guess that's up to y'all. To me, I prefer that they tie, but that, you know, when I look at our audit report each year, the red numbers, you know, I don't like the red numbers. The red numbers in the brackets mean you overspent, and it doesn't necessarily take away the position. So the FTE from like an HR standpoint would still be there, and with a contract, usually it's a finite amount of time. So, you know, we may hire somebody under contract for one school year, and it would certainly, I would think, and I don't want to speak for HR, but I would think we would certainly then try again, because we still have the FTE there physically, so we would try again to hire it. So it's not like the budget would go away in the new year. The FTE would still be there.
I'm not, you know, I guess I'm speaking to the board now. I'm not saying that the FTE would go away or anything like that, but typically you live with reality. Here's the budget that we set, just like a family. Here's the budget that we set, here's how we spent. If at the end of the day you stayed within your total, great. I mean, that's really the goal. But you don't want to muddy the waters by moving stuff, and then you don't really know what happened. Also, again, the public doesn't really know what happened. We spent a lot of time on a contract for social emotional learning with allowing $250,000. You could take a chunk of money that was spent somewhere else and allocate it to that or allocate it elsewhere. So I'm just concerned that we know where we're over and under, and that we, most importantly, wherever possible, we're never taking money out of instruction and spending it somewhere else. That's my biggest concern.
Well, I will say, so I don't support your motion because I feel like the administration brought us this, you know, they brought this to us because they needed help with that $10,000 number. I don't necessarily agree with their $250,000 number, but I think removing $10,000 altogether and making it even harder for them, I mean, I just don't understand that. And I do think that, I mean, I could see where, you know, you're looking at a school and they budgeted $12,000 for kindergarten books, and then enrollment this year was up and they needed to put $10,000 or $12,000 in third grade books, or I mean, I'm using hypotheticals off the cuff, but I could see where that would happen, and that's so operational, not for the board, and it's a small amount of money. $250,000 seems like a lot. Even if it's for software, I would think that would come to, you know, that would come to the board. But, I mean, removing the $10,000, I just feel like that gets into the weeds. And it's, I mean, Ms. Wilkerson has clarified that, I mean, we're staying within the function. So the major category is instruction. So if you're not moving something from instruction to something else. I mean, I just don't interpret it that way.
Can't you do that under $250,000? Maybe I don't understand.
Well, I mean, I think you can, but I mean, you've eliminated the whole like $10,000. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm just saying I just disagree with your motion. I'm trying to explain that. I don't necessarily agree with that policy as written right now, but Dr. Ross, I know you've tried to get my attention like 5 times, sorry.
No, I just wanted to speak, it's my role as superintendent to speak on each action of the board when I see so. And this is a time that I need to exercise that right. I think we really muddied and we got too deep into the weeds here. The goal of the board when we went to superintendent school was the board tells you where to go, the administration flies there. We're the pilots, you tell us the destination. When policy tries to drive the plane, we really get off. The problem I have with this amendment is that it is truly flying the plane at this point. We need clear policy, and we'll follow it. To have a rule with an exception is not clear policy. So to say you can do this except when it's subs, there are so many conditions in which we have to make adjustments. The board approves the budget in June. The schools open in August and September. In that time, realities have changed. Now, I don't think we've changed the budget. And I could be wrong, but I don't think we've ever changed the budget without bringing it to the board and saying we would like to do a budget amendment. What we're asking for is that if we hit turbulence during the flight, that we're given permission to move through it. Transparency means we tell you, we veered off this way, we veered off that way, but we did not change the budget. I need to give the CFO and the finance office within the category the ability to fly through the changes of the turbulence, that administration should be able to have it, and report that to the board. We thought we needed this many scissors in kindergarten. We now need this many in first grade. It's still within the same category. We have not changed the budget. Give the administration an opportunity to do its job. We will report what we have done, and if we fail to do it, hold the superintendent accountable. But we can't fly the plane through policy. That is my issue with this. We need flexibility to be able to move within the category. If we change the category for $1, we come back to the board. It is not, we're not changing any categories. But to think that we can predict, and we're doing projections. We've just talked about how Chapin is changing. The reality of what's going to hit us in August has never been 100% predicted in June. So I think listening to our finance office, we are clearly transparent. No one's trying to hide anything. We will report all transfers. You can see them. We'll do the budget report. We can say we've transferred this. But if we come back to change the budget, that's an amendment to the budget. And that's when we would need a board approval for that.
Mr. Scully, and then we'll call for the vote.
First of all, 100% agree with everything you just said. It's right down to the transparency. There's no lack of transparency in this request. I do not support the amendment. Easy fix. Anytime you do a transfer, keep a footnote on the monthly report. That's that simple. It's not, I think in a previous meeting, Ms. Huddle referred to it as a shell game. It's not. The budget's not changing. Like Dr. Ross said, you took the words right out of my mouth. So you're just moving within the category. It is not our job on the board to operate this. Let them do their jobs. You have the attorney opinion, Ms. Wilkerson. Is that in writing or was it verbal? Do you have it, a letter?
Well, the AG opinion that Ms. Huddle shared is in writing, but then my discussion with Alan, again, was not directly about that AG opinion. It was just about school district budgets in general and the statutes around them, and that was over the phone, but I can certainly ask for that in writing.
If you get it, I think it would be, if you had it, I would add it to the minutes. But I think, and That's what I was referring to, was your discussion with Ellen. Regarding the AG opinion, I think that's apples to oranges to this discussion. A county ordinance is not a school board policy. Totally different laws relating it. Also, to Ms. Huddle's example about the family budget, I don't think that's accurate either. A more accurate representation would be a family budget where you give your kid a $10 allowance and say, go spend that, and they can go and spend the $10 on whatever they want, whether it's a candy bar, a book, or whatever, without parental approval, not changing the overall family budget. So I think that's a more, that example just didn't relate to this. So just reiterate my support for everything Dr. Ross said. I do not favor the amendment, and I will not vote for it. Thank you.
All right, I was going to call for okay, Mr. Hogan.
Ms. Ms. Wilkerson, with, and just to make sure, you've said it multiple times, I want to hear it one more time. Within the transfers of this budget, we're not taking it from scissors and moving it to plumbing supplies. Okay?
No, we would not,
but
we would not be, because that, again, that would go from instruction to a support service, so we would not do that.
And I think what's giving me a little bit of a hang up on this right now is the first wording, transfer budget amounts between major categories in the general operating fund. And I guess in my interpretation, major categories is scissors to plumbing, right? So is there a way that that could be worded to where it's a little more specific?
I mean, I could certainly, the language in here, I guess my concern with the language in here is that it states function. And my concern there is that we kind of use that term there interchangeably between all of these different ones that are listed here. Okay. The way the state defines it is the major function would be the 100, and then the sub-function would be 110, 111, 112, 113, which correspond to kindergarten, primary, elementary programs. So I just think, I guess culturally, maybe we would just have to understand, and I would leave detailed notes that culturally, even though we call all these things functions internally, the true function itself is instruction. The true function is support services. The true function is community services.
And the way this policy is written, is there any provision, in your opinion, to where is this $250,000 per transfer? So there's really nothing that's prohibiting us from taking $250 from this pot and moving it to this pot of scissors, and then another transaction of $240 from this pot to this pot. Like, you kind of get where I'm going at?
I do, but I guess my concern with going back to the old language of the aggregate, then, I mean, there is certainly times where over the year we would get to $250,000. So then at what point would we bring it to you? If we've already done, say, 10, that get us to 240, and then I bring one to you, that would be over the two, like, I just don't know where we would draw that line.
Yeah, I get it.
But again, I think it's similar to like some of our procurement practices. Like, I think there's policy and then there's practice. And I mean, this is my opinion, I'm gonna be honest, but I don't know that we need to be that restrictive, because just in practice, we don't do those types of things. We don't try to circumvent policy just to get something by. So that would certainly, I would hope, be something that we, if we find we do truly need $260,000 to be moved from this to this, we would absolutely, I think, I can certainly speak for my team, we would be honest in that and bring that to the board instead of circumventing and breaking it up into two separate transactions.
Okay, I'm going to call for the vote. We actually have two motions on the floor. We have Ms. Huddle's motion to amend the original motion, so I'm going to call for that vote now. All in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? All opposed? 4. That motion fails 4-2 with 1 abstention. And that brings to the table the original motion for first reading for budget transfers, the amendment, but the budget transfers.
Ms. Hines, I have another subsidiary motion.
All right.
Okay. I move that we defer first reading on this policy change until we get a opinion from the Attorney General.
Do I have a second? All right.
I'll second, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Mr.
The reason why is the Attorney General's opinion that I sent is, let me find the number. The Attorney General is basing their opinion on South Carolina 49140, which does apply to counties. However, that law never specifies budget transfers. So I think the Attorney General was relying on the fact that that law says that the budget has to be approved, much in the same way the law that applies to school districts requires that the budget be approved, but doesn't mention budget transfers. We've lived with $10,000 for forever, so why not be on the safe side and get an Attorney General's opinion to see if it applies to school districts?
Well, I will say, and then I'll go to Mr. Satterfield, just so I don't lose my train of thought, Mr. Satterfield. I will say that I don't support the $250,000 number, but what I do see, and that's just because I have questions about that. And so what I do see is supporting Ms. Huddle's motion and getting an opinion and making sure that that is, to see what that is, whether or not they're going to agree that school districts are like counties or not. That might actually answer other questions that we've had, or at least, I don't know if answer, but there might be some things that can be inferred. I agree that might be the best course of action instead of eliminating the $10,000 or completely just tabling or getting rid of the policy altogether. I don't know.
How long does it typically take to get an AG opinion?
I think that's up to them. I mean, I
We
think it
should-
varies depending
Okay.
on a few months. It
And
may
as far
take
as
longer.
the process behind that, will that, somebody within the district office reach out and request that, or will that be one of the responsibilities of us? Like, walk me through that. To get it, will
I
that
think that the
be?
administration writes a letter
Okay.
and say, I mean,
I disagree. I think this is board policy. We don't recommend this. We would like to base our policies off the law. And right now, our attorneys have given us guidance. If the board wants to get an opinion from the AG, that should be a board action. Ours is based off the law.
but the board can direct the superintendent to ask for an opinion on the policy.
Then that would be an action
Yeah.
that y'all will take.
Right. All right, Mr. Satterfield, go ahead.
Okay, and by the way, this is called synergy, when everybody gives their own opinions,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to offer my opinion. After listening, and I've been listening carefully to everybody's input and their take on this, and I know that I initially said, and I stand by that comment, the shocker is the 250,000, from 10,000 to 250. I got out my calculator. I wasn't on my cell phone. I was using my calculator, and that is 0.001% of our budget. And I was looking, and I had already been reading Lexington District 1, and I'm sure that they're not breaking any laws. Lexington 1, Fort Mill, who we model a lot of our policies after, they're very good. Richland 1 and Richland 2, all of them none of them give a budget amount except for Richland 2. They give the $250,000. And they point out, all of them do point out, though, that the changes must conform with the approved, with regards to law, with the approved state law with budgetary procedures. And listening to our CFO here, I'm starting to be of the opinion that we should pass this as first reading. And the reason for that is, I think that we feel like we're having to be the ones who are making these decisions instead of having a policy that allows the people that we hire to do these jobs. We're trying to, in a sense, I feel like we're micromanaging there. I mean, we hire these, we have attorneys giving us input, we have all these brilliant people on this panel, we have a super CFO that I'm really disappointed that she's leaving, but I think we should trust them in what they're asking us to do. And they're staying within the framework, they've gotten legal advice, they've gone through the process, And that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to call for the vote. We have, Yep, I'm calling for the vote. We have another amendment on the table, Ms. Huddle's amendment to defer the policy until the board receives an AG opinion. So I will call for that vote. All in favor of Ms. Huddle's motion? All opposed? All right, so that motion passes 4-3. So that original motion is off the, do we need to, the original motion would be off of the table, right? Am I? Okay, I'm just making sure. Sorry, everyone watching this. It's starting to get late. Ms. Huddle, do you want to make a motion on how that opinion, or do you have opinions on, or a thought on how you want that motion to reach the AG? Do you want to send, or do you want to draft a letter to for the board to sign? Do you want the superintendent, logistically, how does that work?
My understanding is that I don't think an individual board member can do it. We have to do it as a board. So.
Do you want to draft a letter and bring it to the board?
Yeah,
for
I'll just
approval?
do that, and we can put it on the next
To the
agenda.
next agenda?
It'll be real simple, though.
Okay.